Hello and welcome to the Orange County Library System as we host our next author event. Thank you for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders. If you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook Live, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to drop those in the chat and we'll get to as many as possible. Kimberly Brock is the best-selling author of The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare and her award-winning debut, The River Witch. The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare spent 3 weeks on the Southern Independent Booksellers bestseller list. The River Witch was an Amazon bestseller featured by both national and international book clubs and included in multiple reading lists. Praised by RT Reviews and Huffington Post as a solemn journey of redemption, enlightenment, and love, and evocative of the stories of Flannery O'Connor and Carson McCullers. It was honored with the prestigious Georgia Author of the Year Award in 2013 by the Georgia Writers Association. A former actor and special needs educator, Kimberly received her bachelor's degree from the University of West Georgia in 1996. In 2014, Kimberly founded Timberbox Writers Workshop, a transformative creative experience for women in the arts. Kimberly has served as a guest lecturer for many regional and national groups, including the Women's Fiction Writers Annual Conference and the Pat Conroy Literary Center. She lives near Atlanta with her husband and 3 children. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Good. It's so good to see you.
It's nice to see you. Long time. I'm trying to remember what year that was. We were in Florida for the book conference.
Well, so I would say I have that good a memory, but no, Google was my friend and I had to look at it. So it was 2013, which doesn't seem possible. It seems
I
like it was
know.
not that long ago. But yeah, I got to moderate with you and Erica Marks, I think. And so yeah,
Yes.
it was great. It was a great time. Well, welcome. We're so glad that you're able to join us on our
Thank you.
Facebook and YouTube Live. And if it's all right with you, I thought we'd just start with you kind of reading a passage
Oh,
for a
yeah.
little bit, and then I'll get some questions started. And then I figured we'll be able to talk whether we get questions or not, but we'll be happy to take people's questions as they have them. So
Sounds great. I'm just going to read from the prologue, I think.
okay,
Start where it starts, right?
yep, that sounds great.
So everybody sit down, crisscross applesauce, right? I always think about that when I read out loud.
Yeah.
The summer I turned 13, my mother took me into the forest to work a charm that was my right from birth. They say what happened there might have killed me. I think I might have killed her instead. I thought it would be like her and all the women before me in my mother's family. For generations, they'd come of age by inheriting a vision and learning of a myth whispered from mother to daughter, but no vision had ever come. The charm that had been uttered for generations turned to poison in my hands. And when my mother died, the myth and all it meant went with her. The story I was left with is one I've never told. The truth is, things had taken a wrong turn even before the trail faded beneath the palmetto fronds, flooding out into swampy ponds as the light faded over the wetland. First, Mama lost her sense of direction. And then, in the night, she lost her mind. And while I'd slept beneath the hush of tall pines, secure in her love, she deserted me. It was a wonder, people later said, that I found my way home, surviving the sucking mud and the creatures that might have devoured me. And in fact, when I ran into the yard the next morning, some thought I was a ghost. To my horror, so did my mother. She took one look at me and said, "Who are you, child? Tell me." I had no answer for her. My mother taught me that a story matters not because it is true, but because it's been told. I don't know if I believe this, but I've been trying to find a way to tell myself the story of that night with Mama my whole life in hopes that one day the ending will change. For a while, we both came home that day. The truth is, both of us disappeared. Once there was a girl who went into the forest. Until now, I've tried to forget what happened. I'd never planned to go back to that place. But that was before I had a daughter of my own. Now she looks to me with the question all daughters are bound to ask their mothers: Who are you? And I hear the echo behind that question: Who am I? Even if I have no answer, I'm still my mother's daughter. And so I will give to my own daughter the only story I know, and hope that if I tell it well, she'll find the answers she needs. Once there was a girl who always took a dare. Once there was a girl who went to sleep and awoke someone else. Once there was a girl who could always find her way home.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, that, the prologue there really just sets up this, the whole novel, and, thinking back about how much uh, throughout the book that kind of scene plays out, and then kind of coming back to the prologue um, is really something. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration for this story.
I'm just so excited you're reading it after all these years, because you waited a long time. And this book, you're going to laugh when I tell you this. So, my two oldest children are in their 20s now.
Mhm,
When I first learned about the Georgia connection to the lost colony, they were in diapers.
mhm,
So I've known that bit of history about the Dare Stones for all that time. And I actually ran across it. I was I had just written River Witch. I was still working on it. It was before it published, and we were living in North Carolina at the time, and the internet was kind of new.
Great.
And it was like having the library at home. The kids would go to sleep for a nap, and I would just sit and you could find everything. So I
Right.
was sort of addicted for a little while to just Googling random things. And I was looking specifically for Appalachian history, just obscure things
Mhm,
because I was informing one of the characters in River Witch. And I loved when I was like third or fourth grade, the whole story about the lost colony.
mhm,
My dad was our family historian, and everything. If we went on a family trip, it was about history. We were at the museum or at the reenactment, or it was always history. And so I can remember being in third or fourth grade and learning about the lost colony, and there was no ending to the story. We
mhm.
didn't know what happened. So it was this historical mystery, and that just set me on fire as a little kid. I
Right.
wanted to be all into that. So when I came across this article online about the Dare Stones,
Mhm,
and it connected my home state of Georgia to the lost colony mystery, I was all over that.
right.
But I could not figure out what to write about,
Mhm,
what I would have to say about it, what I thought about the stones. And I guess really my question even then was, does it matter if it's true, or
uh-huh.
just that the story is told? I was already starting to kind of grapple with that. I'm still grappling with that, with what I
Right.
think about that.
Right.
So years went by, and I tried writing from Eleanor Dare's perspective, and it was
Mm.
so boring, Edward. It was terrible. I was so bored. It was awful. And I kept throwing it out and throwing it out, and trying to quit. And it just kept coming back, and I could not figure it out. And so eventually I came to a place where I realized if I was asking a question about the stone, there were two things I knew. I knew the date on that first Dare stone was carved in 1591, when the
Mhm,
colony would have disappeared. And I knew when it was found in 1937 in North
mhm.
Carolina near Edenton. And I thought, wonder where it was all the time in between.
Right.
And
Right.
and who would it have mattered to? Who would that matter to? Your family stories, you know, who would Eleanor Dare's family have been? And
Hmm.
so I began the story after it had already been dismissed as a big joke,
Right.
and the family is questioning, does it matter if it's true or not, or just that
Hmm.
it's told and it's a story that we tell and pass down in our family? So that's
Right.
where it comes from.
Well, that's great. And I think about just like you're saying, family histories, and I think about my own family and stories that we tell each other. But I have a large family, and so each kid will remember different details, and
Yeah.
then mom and dad remember different things, and so it's kind of fascinating. But unless you talk to everybody, you don't get the full picture, and even then
No.
it's kind of all of our memories, and what are we leaving out, the good things or the bad things. And so and it seems like that'd be kind of one of the challenges in writing a story like this is you know how to how do you keep those things that are hard to write about, and those that uh, not that they come easy, but just they're more comfortable, that the pages
Yeah.
might fly by versus the others that are like, ooh, I'm delving into something a little harder here. So
Yep. There were a lot of choices made, and it was difficult in turn. I mean, there were several reasons that was hard, not just the fact that I was writing about a a woman who came here before the country was established. So we're talking about colonization.
mhm,
That's not an
mhm,
easy story. That's not a pretty story to write.
right.
And then I'm also writing a story that has no ending because we don't know what happened to the colony.
Mhm,
And then I'm also writing about women's history. You
right.
try and find them because they're
Right.
hard to find. You don't just
Mhm,
find their stories written down or recorded in factual ways. You have to find it through art and journaling and even recipes. And
right.
that's where the idea of the commonplace book comes from. Their women's stories are kind of in the cracks of history and in really beautiful ways sometimes. So
Right.
like family Bibles. And
Uh-huh.
so I had to just kind of trace and imagine a lot of things.
So you'll probably appreciate this. I have a an old cassette tape that has my mother and my grandmother singing these songs, that they kind of passed down. And I only remember one of them, but it was fascinating. And I think now, again, like the internet, you can find versions of them, like on these, archival family history songs, but slight
Yeah.
variations though. Like the change of key or whatever is a little bit different than I remember, but it's interesting. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk with you about, or have you talk about, is right out of the gate, there's strong women characters, the relationship between the main character and the daughter. Um, but then as you keep reading, I mean, it's just chock full of, um, different generations and women and their relationships to their mothers, and how, complicated they can be. And so maybe talk a little bit about how you're able to work through all that and talk about some of that. So
Well, Ed, I hate to tell you this, but I'm a woman. And I'm a mother. And then you add on top of that, I don't know if you can tell from the accent, but I'm definitely from the South. And so
right.
there's this kind of goulash, this gumbo of affection and spite and memory and grief and women's relationships are very complicated, especially in families like this one. And I I guess some of it I draw, from my own life, my own personal relationships, but a lot of it is imagination and observation, just like any fiction writer.
Right.
And I I think um, I like I said, I started with Eleanor and it wasn't working. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't connect to her as a character because I was I was very emotionally connected to the idea of her and the idea of that first Dare Stone.
Mhm.
And I had gone to see it. You can make an appointment and go to the college. It's about an hour north of me here in Gainesville, Georgia, and they have it in an archive room. You can go view it. And I really was not telling anybody I was a writer or that I had written the first novel, and I'm still kind of bashful about that in some
Right.
kind of weird psychotic way.
Right.
And but I didn't really want anybody to know that I wanted to write about it because I didn't want anybody to tell me I couldn't either. That was another thing. So I
Mhm.
go in and I see this big stone and I was excited, but I what I didn't anticipate was that I started to cry. And the poor lady working in that little archive room, you work in a library. She
Right.
looked at me like, "Woo, honey, we're gonna need to get you somebody." And I apologized and I told her I wasn't crazy, which immediately is the wrong thing to say because then she's really worried. And it was just
Right.
the two of us. And I left and I got my car and I drove home. And the whole way home, I was trying to figure out why I was so emotional about it. And I realized I was angry because it was this woman's story that had been lost not once but twice once they dismissed the history of those stones.
Mhm.
And once I connected to that, and then I started thinking about my main character, Alice, as her descendant, it really became a story about identity and the people who've come before us and how what we know about them as much as what we don't know about them, how
Right.
that impacts us and how the choices that we make, the way that we interact with our families and our children and our neighbors and at large even our country.
Hmm.
And so the choices I made about each of the women in the book, to get to your question, were really
Mhm.
about those questions.
Mhm.
So that
Mhm.
each of them, I hope, depict a little bit of that. And what you were talking about with the idea that it's like a game of telephone, this story that they've passed down from one generation to the next. And
Mhm.
mothers tell their daughters what their daughters need to hear at the moment that they're telling them. They may not tell them the whole story.
Right.
And sometimes you get it all, sometimes you don't. Sometimes there's a lot you have to live with not knowing. And how do you
Mhm.
do that? So all of those things went into the idea of each of these women and how they interacted with one another. And the time period for Alice and Penn Young, right at the end of World War II, I liked that it kind of reflected and mirrored where Eleanor would have been standing on the edge of the world with this child, this little girl, whether it was Virginia Dare, who we don't know what happened to that baby or to Eleanor, or a second daughter, which is fictionalized in my book,
Mhm.
and the idea of a new world and
Right.
no idea what was coming next. And I feel like the end of World War II, they're at the end of the war, but they don't know that.
Right.
But
Mhm.
they're seeing everything change and all this uncertainty and the possibilities for her daughter and what might come next. So all those things I was trying to address and looking back at who our mothers and our grandmothers and 16, I believe, 15, 16 generations of Dare descendants,
Mhm.
who they've been, how they've come here, how they've moved through the birth of our country and why they've moved through it the way that they have, who they married,
Mhm.
and who was here before them. And so I hope it's that kind of a feeling when you read the book that
Mhm.
it's like knitting a chain and you can see it take a form and then that connection is there for the characters in 1945.
Right. Well, and uh, something else, and so it's always you don't know who's read the book
Yeah.
on the thing, so I don't want to give too much away, but I will say so Allison Penn kind of go back to a place where people are very familiar with their history and their family, and so maybe talk a little bit about how they or how we deal with sometimes going home, and you can't go home again, but when you do, yeah, then you really do have to kind of reconcile with
Yeah.
with
What people
things.
think about you, for sure.
Uh,
So, yeah, I mean, I get asked a lot if the home that they return to, if I based it on a real place, or if it is a real place. And I I based it on a real place that was in North Georgia, but I had already written the the first draft of the book. So I imagined the place, then I
mhm,
discovered the place that was real in North
mhm,
Georgia. Didn't know it was there at the time. And then I decided to plop it down in Savannah. So first of all, Evertell is not real, but it kind of is,
right.
and it's a beautiful home up in North Georgia where one of our former governors lived. It's called the Hardman
Mhm,
Farm. You can visit it. Um, a- as a fictional place, to me, it is the South. It's this big haunted house that's
mhm,
full of all of your family ghosts and your
right.
community ghosts and
Right.
your historical ghosts, and it's been built out over generations, and so you wonder who built it, what were the conditions when they did,
Mhm,
why do we own this property, where did it come from, and now you have this, when the story begins, you have this estate that's sitting there run down and empty. So, how do you make a home out of that when it's in a shambles again? How do you start over? How do you lay a table for yourself and your neighbors? And how do you sit there together? Who's your
mhm,
enemy? Who's your friend? All of those
right.
questions are being asked. And when you come home after being away, one of the most interesting things that I had fun with in this book is Alice's perspective, because Alice leaves when she's a girl and comes back as a young widow and mother.
Mm,
And her perspective on what happened to her family, and even to her personally, is the perspective of a child. And she's
mm,
judged herself that way even into adulthood, which
right.
we do.
Mm,
And so going back home is this very challenging thing. She doesn't want people to look at her. She's ashamed.
mm,
Um, and they're all looking at her and remembering she was a girl. She doesn't remember it that way. They
right.
remember her parents differently with different perspectives. Each of the characters in the book comes to her with a whole different story and a whole different perspective on what
Mhm,
happened to them before they left there. And it's not till the end of the book, even her daughter's perspective on
right.
her and what happened to them is different. So everybody's
Mhm,
holding up a mirror in front of Alice to the very end of the book before she can finally see herself. And
mhm,
isn't that what it's like when you go home?
right.
Isn't that
Right.
why you hate it?
Right.
Because you're very vulnerable in front of people that have known you since you were a kid.
Mhm,
That and you want to be grown up to them and evolved, and they remember you when you were doing whatever you were doing,
right.
or
Right.
but they also maybe know the pieces to that story that you're trying to put together, the missing pieces. So
Mhm.
that was another part of going home.
Well, so I'll be curious how you answer this question, because I don't know if you meant it this way, but at the beginning, when you kind of introduce Sonder, who's one of the male characters that she kind of grew up with there at Evertell, but there was this, I don't want to say ominous, but I didn't know what to think about. Like, I was very wary of him for large chunks there. I don't want to say even in the beginning, but it was hard for me to trust, I don't know, his interactions for a large amount of time. And I think as the book progresses, you kind of see how, again, all those new relationships evolve and the history. Um, but it almost, I mean, it almost made me think of like the marshes and like Great Expectations and this, I don't know, this just this character that, you know, you're not sure what to think about. So
I love that. You are the first person who gets it. Even the Great Expectations reference. That it was
right.
definitely like playing in my mind. I love Dickens. I love Dickens. So that's funny to me that you caught that because, it's just kind of in my juices, I guess, to
Uh-huh.
to do that. But I think I think maybe what you're experiencing is that when you meet somebody that has known you
Mhm.
from earlier in your life, they know you in a different way. And there is this expectation that because you knew each other when you were young, that you still know each other when you meet again.
Right. Yeah.
But people have had lives
Mhm.
and have their own secrets that they keep. And so getting to know somebody else is sometimes challenging. Trust
Mhm.
is really hard for Alice. And there's the illusion with Sonder that it's easy for him. Some of that
Mhm.
illusion is her, the way that she related to him when they were kids.
Mhm.
And now that's not true between them anymore. So,
Right.
I like you said, I don't want to say too much, but Sonder
Yeah.
has his own reasons for being careful what he says and where he leads. He wants to let
Mhm.
her find her way in some ways in the story.
Right.
Does that get to what you're
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
talking about?
Yeah, definitely. Um,
He has his own relationship with her family that she had nothing to do with, and she doesn't know that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and um, one thing that so I don't know how much this has come up in some of your other talks, so you'll have to forgive me if you're like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. But I think in some of the reviews and some of the things that I read, like it's all, and it's not that we have to pigeonhole books, but like your book is like, just like you're saying, it's sort of historical fiction, but it's also got this romance element that's also got this mystery thing. Like it's like very all encompassing. Like I think it would be hard to kind of pin down because I think it has some really broad appeal that I think sometimes even if even if they might think it women's fiction, because if you read interviews with you or some of the acknowledgments, there are a lot of authors that you kind of acknowledge, um, but I thought it was interesting that you kind of touch on all these different elements that make the story really intriguing and kind of in a unique and different way than just kind of pigeonholed into a certain genre or category, I guess you'd say.
I just did a talk on this for the Atlanta Writers Club, and basically I told them I don't I don't pay attention to
Mhm,
genre,
mhm.
and I will tell you a secret. I blame the library because
Uh,
I loved the library growing up.
mhm,
And I grew up in an old house that had no air conditioning till I was in high school. So
mhm,
if you wanted to cool down in the summer, you were outside, or we went to the library because
mhm.
they had AC. So it was good in the library, right?
Right,
But
right.
I loved our library and I loved the library at school too. Unfortunately, I read everything. And I went through, I mean, like my middle school librarian was sneaking books in for me because I read everything. I was bored. I am bored in general as a human being with the
Mm,
world as it exists, which is why I write fiction,
right.
right? And why there's a little bit of mysticism and a and a bit of magic or wonder. And I think with the history here, I like the mystery better than I like the answer.
Mhm, mhm.
So I think really what it comes down to is I like to speculate. So I think about this book that way. Um, but genre wise, I don't know. I just told a story I would want to sit and listen to. And maybe it comes from my background. I love an underdog. I love to color outside the lines a little bit. I like to use the wrong color, you know.
Right.
And I was very precocious as a kid. It takes a lot to keep my attention on something. So maybe that's what it is. It's just my worldview. It's how I see things. It's how I process everything around me and entertain myself. So there
Right.
it is. It's kind of madness, but I know it's frustrating probably to try and figure out where to shelve it. It's hard to know how to market it. My poor marketing team. But it is a woman's story for sure. It's very much about women's history and women their their relationships, but it's larger than that. It's
Hmm.
not a book of answers, it's a book of questions. So
Right.
if you're looking for a typical mystery, it's not that.
Right.
It's
Right.
not a typical dual timeline. Tried that. It was so bad. And so I mean, I wrote the whole manuscript in the 1945 timeline and turned it in. And my
Hmm.
agent said, "This is great. Now where's the rest?" And I said, "What do
Hmm.
you mean? I gave you all these generations. What more do you want?" And she said, "Where's Eleanor's story?" And I hadn't written it because I
Hmm.
had tried
Oh,
so
wow.
hard and didn't like it. And I fought her for 6 weeks before I gave in and wrote it as Eleanor's tale. And it's more of a fable. And it started out all one chunk in the center of the book, and then we moved it around. And so nothing about this book, I don't think, is traditional. Um, and it's sort of an accident that it is what it is.
Right. Well, and to me, like in reading it, also, um, it was just, I don't want to say I had to pace myself, but you made me actually pace myself by the writing. Like, so it was where I felt like I could read passages or read, several chapters, and like you're talking about, kind of go to the present, but then you get a little glimpse of, well, the present isn't, the past isn't quite what you think it is, and then you go back to her story. But there was something really nice and different about that reading experience that I think, people that haven't picked it up, whether on audiobook or through the library, or have bought a copy, should really consider that, because it's a very, I thought it was a very, it kind of makes you slow down, which we don't really like to do much of. We like, instant news, instant gratification, and it, so again, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was a cozy book, because you're still talking about, loss and World War II, um, and these complex relationships, but there was still, it didn't get so heavy like you find in a lot of books, or like, as I think about my bookshelf, a lot of these books, that are very, you know very heavy, and my kids will even say, wow, why do you just read about real life when we can just, we can turn on the news and experience, those things. But I found that very, uh, I feel like people would really enjoy that about your book, and how, um, calming or comforting it is, even with kind of these complex histories and relationships going on. So.
Thank you. That's very thoughtful. It isn't it, it isn't commercial, and yet it's accessible, I hope,
Hmm.
but it is literary leaning. And I
Hmm.
think that's what you feel and what I have heard other readers talk about, that this is not a fast-paced, page-turning kind of a book. It's a thoughtful book.
Right.
And it's a southern story,
Hmm.
so it goes at its own pace. It's a little
Right.
slower. You're going to walk with some ghosts. and you're going to think about your own ghosts, I hope. And
Right.
and in the end, I think it is a hopeful novel.
Hmm.
I find hope in the unanswered things in the world, the
Right.
unexplained, and the things that I can't see and can't know for sure. And I think that's the message at the heart of this book, is to love that mystery more than the answers that we can get, because it means there's more, that there is
Hmm.
hope, that there's more.
Yeah. Um, maybe talk a little bit about Tinderbox Writers Workshop, and I guess now the pandemic, has that just totally,
Yeah,
yeah, but
it did. It did.
maybe talk a little bit about it. And
I hope to reimagine it. It did a few things, didn't it? I mean, I was doing retreats on a biannual basis, and they're specifically for women.
Mhm,
We get pretty personal at these retreats, and they're
mhm,
very much about creativity, and we write. But
mhm,
I I I haven't done them at all since
right,
COVID, and missed them, but I did finish a book. So,
right, right.
but I do hope to reimagine what those might be
Hmm.
in the next year or so, and
Hmm.
try and do that again once I'm not doing so much book tour and book talk
Yeah.
for Eleanor. But it came about, Eleanor took me a long time to write. It was 9 years between my first novel and this one, and I was raising kids and going through
Mhm,
my own personal life,
right.
and there was a period of time where I really wasn't writing, and I was frustrated, and I kept hearing women around me. I would hear them talking about the same feelings. I don't
Hmm.
do anything creative. I used to be creative, but now I just don't do anything anymore that's creative, or I'm not creative, or all of these negative kind of shut down sort of just bemoanings, and I heard them
Hmm.
everywhere. I'd hear them at church, I'd hear them at the grocery store, I'd hear it just everywhere.
Right.
And I thought, well, I don't know how to do very many things, but I know how to make a space. And so I sat down in a rented little room at a cottage. This lady ran a shop, and I put out the call, and I said, if anybody wants to come write and talk about stories, I'll be here. And that's how it started. And women came, and women I had never seen before. And we do
Hmm.
like little 6-week courses, and so much art and story and beauty came out of them. I was stunned. And it was my pleasure to be a conduit to that. And
Hmm.
I think I got more from it than any of
Right.
the women who attended. But it's been beautiful to see. And I hope I get to start doing those again soon.
Yeah. Now, maybe talk a little bit about how your own creative process or writing process has changed during COVID, or since then, or
I you're talking you're talking to the only woman in the world who enjoyed COVID, because I am such an introvert. I was like,
uh-huh,
so sorry, can't come out today. I
right.
think I'll stay home and write or cook or do whatever. I am such an introvert, and I've always been an introvert. I love to teach.
Hmm.
Um, I will stand in front of a billion people and speak. That doesn't bother me at all. But just in general, I'm a homebody. I like
Hmm.
being at home. I like small. I like quiet. I like routine. And so COVID was great for that. In terms of my writing routine, it didn't change a whole lot,
Hmm.
because, that's just sort of how my household operates. We all are that way. My youngest is the only extrovert in my house. And if it weren't for him, we'd just walk around like little monks, I think, all the time. But I I tend to write in a very I'm not one way or the other. I like a plan. I like to feel like I have a plan, and then if I have the plan, I can do whatever I want.
Hmm.
So I do outline. I don't write at my desk every day. I move around. I find that I can't always write in the same place for different projects.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't work for some reason. I use different rooms in my house or my car even. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as the kids have gotten older, it's been easier to ride at home. I used to be in the car driving people everywhere, and I ran my battery down a couple of times at preschool. The preacher at the church had to come jump my car off twice because I
Right.
had ran my battery down while I was riding River Witch. I haven't done that with Eleanor, but I don't think about writing as just being at my desk
Uh-huh.
and putting words into my laptop or even in the notebook. I fill notebooks with notes too. I handwrite a lot. It's a lot in my head. I
Mhm.
would say more than half of the time I spend writing a book is in my head before I'm
Mhm.
ever actually seated. I know some people have a really strict this many hours a day, this many words.
Right.
So far, I don't. Ask me again in a year because I'm on deadline now.
Well, so speaking of that, see, you're gonna just loop right into my next. So, are you working on something new? Like, what's
I am. I am
so?
not talking a whole lot about it. It is
Uh-huh.
another Georgia coast. I'm not done with that yet. Whatever it
Hmm.
is that pulls me there, I'm still working through those themes and ideas in my head. So it is a story that takes place in 1959 in a fictional town on the Georgia coast, just near Cumberland Island. So the backdrop is the crumbling Carnegie mansions on Cumberland Island, and it's a bit of a ghost story and a bit of a myth. So typical Kim Brock. I don't know what you
Right.
call it. You tell me what that
Right.
genre is.
Right. Well, and I mean, southern, like, so. I mean, that kind of just leads into my next question about. I mean, so how do you see your writing? Kind of paying homage to all the southern, the southern writing that's out there, the ghost stories and the myths and the legends and the
I think it's
family. I mean,
yeah, I think it's a sensibility.
mhm,
I've had people. I can remember with the first book, with River Witch. I remember them asking me, did you set out to write Southern Gothic? And I said, that what? What is that?
mhm,
I've
mhm,
read all of those books, but I wasn't really aware at that point of what I had done. And
mhm,
I think it's because if you grow up in the South, there's a sensibility to that just is going to permeate your writing. If I don't write, I think if I wrote a novel set in space, it would be Southern Gothic. It just would because
right.
it's how I think. And it's it's all of the things that went into me as a kid and even as an adult what I experienced living in this region of the country. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I lived in Seattle for 4 years teaching phonics, and believe me, baby, they all sounded like this when they started reading. So
Right. I remember when I taught in Arkansas. So I didn't have a lot of twang, but in Arkansas, I developed a certain sound that I could use and bring up at will. And in thinking about our interview, I was like, I wonder if I'll break out with some of my just natural matching Southern. Anybody watching would be like, I've seen some of Edward's other author interviews, and they really sound like that. So I'm
I
not sure. I'm not sure what's happening right now. But
I used to worry about it. When I was younger, it embarrassed me, especially when we were living in Seattle. I would order dinner and nobody could understand me. I'd make my husband order for me. But I'm over it. This is it. This is who
right,
I am. So I've
yeah.
kind of gotten over it. I was joking with a friend of mine today. I was saying, "You're such an academic. You speak with such authority. I sound like a diner waitress telling a story. It's fun, but there's not a lot of authority there with this accent." But I've just decided this is it. I am the ham. I can't help it.
Well, are there any authors or books that you're reading or have read recently? I know sometimes people are wondering what authors whose books they enjoy what other authors they're reading or what other books, have kind of touched them recently.
So I read and have gotten to know Robert Gwaltney, who wrote The Cicada Tree.
Mhm.
And if you want a really Southern Gothic novel, it's a good one. It's his debut, and he did a beautiful job with it. And it's very dark, so be
Mhm.
prepared. Um, and then I just started reading Hester today. It just came out today. And I've been kind of keeping one eye on that book. Just it intrigued me. It's got just enough of the Eleanor thing going on, and I'm I'm enjoying it. I'm like 3 chapters in, and it's beautifully written.
And
So those are the
that's the retelling of Scarlet Letter,
Hester.
right? That's from her.
Yes.
I
Yes.
feel like I saw that too. I don't know if it was on Bookstagram or where, but um, I was just telling my wife, I was like, what
It's
have we
good.
here?
It's good. The
So,
pacing is really good. I'm intrigued by it. I want to see where she's going to go with it. And it's good for October. It's witchy, so it's kind of
mhm.
fun. I wish I had a list. I wish I had a list. I just This one is out today too by Amy Reichert, and I had an arc. If you like a Christmas book, she has a new little light Christmas book, so that was sweet. So very not
Nice,
Southern, but
right?
I'll read a Christmas book anytime.
um, so let's see what other questions I had. Let's see.
Lauren Denton, she's an Alabama author. She has a book out with my publisher today called
Mm.
Place to Land. I wish I had the copy up here with me. I think it's downstairs in my living room, and it's beautiful too. So it's with Harper Muse. I'm excited about it. I've read the first half of the book. I need to finish it. I read like, do you read like lots of books at once? I never read one whole. It's like rare if I read the whole book at one time. I'm reading 3 or 4 at the same time.
So, so that has been one of the strangest changes for me with COVID is my reading habits have just so still read a lot, but it is weird. I will have weeks where I am not reading anything, which is
I did
very
that when COVID first
unusual.
happened. I did that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I'll read a book a day. Like it's either
Yeah.
fast or famine.
All at once. Yep.
And so I've gone even through reading short story collections recently, which I really enjoyed. But
Yeah.
even that became almost too draining. So I've gone to graphic not like because I love graphic novels,
Yeah.
but um, but that's about
Alice
all.
Hoffman has a new short story out today, I think.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I don't know, they don't read a lot of short stories. I love. They're
Yeah, I
just
do too.
wonderful collections out there. And one of our local bookstores, they have so instead of short story anthologies, they'll have individual collections by individual, one author. And it was one of the first bookstores I'd ever been to where they set it up like that, so you could just go, separate from the regular. They didn't have them right up next to their novels. They had them separated, and so if you're in the mood, it's sort of like poetry or anything.
Yeah.
If you're in the mood for it, you could just go right to that section and be like, oh, I'll take that, and I'll take that, take that.
Yeah.
So, so we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to read a favorite passage that
Aw,
you'll be like,
that's a
what?
treat.
But because to me, it kind of encapsulates, what you do, and it's no spoilers, so that's good. But there's just a lot happening in this passage that I think really reflects everything that came before it and everything that came after it. And it's like 251, so it's like, I don't know, it feels like right in the middle. I'm like, what? How did you do that? Anyway, but so so here it is. She knew her father, who had taught her all she knew about faith, feared magic and mystery, and all the ways her mother's book taught her to glimpse the divine. If she told him that her vision came from the leaves of a plant, the water of their own well, and the fire she'd laid in their hearth, he surely would have feared her. But Eleanor was smart. She kept her secret. She ignored the lingering bitterness of the tea, closed her eyes to dream of the wilderness that awaited her, comforted by the sharp scent of evergreen on her pillow. She knew well that she had not become a saint. She had not even become a sorceress. She'd simply become a woman. So, yeah, that was, yeah, just really
Yay,
great.
I'm so glad you like it.
And I think, you know, with your own work as a woman creative author who works with other creative women and authors, it's just yeah. I mean, there's just empowerment there that is long overdue and sorely needed in our world. And so, really appreciate you taking the time to share with us tonight and answer lots of questions. Like I say, we could talk for a long time about books and reading and writing and creativity. And I hope everybody on our Facebook and YouTube Live enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. My favorite thing about this book is that day when I left the library and I had seen the Dare Stone and all those feelings I had, all I could think was it didn't matter to me if what was on that stone was true or not, because it was part of her story now. And I was remembering her all those years later because of that story.
Right.
And I feel like this book means more people will remember her. And it doesn't necessarily matter if we get the facts right or not.
Right.
It's the inspiration of her.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kimberly. And
Thank you.
thank you to everyone who was here tonight. A couple of reminders. Our local author book fair is at the main library from 2 to 4 on Sunday, October 23rd. And we have a number of NaNoWriMo events in October leading up to National Novel Writing Month during the month of November. So make sure and go to ocls.info to sign up for some of those upcoming author events. So thank you once again, and thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you, libraries.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.